I see that. I'm just going to wait for a minute of quiet. Hi, I'm Karen Canote. Welcome everybody to First Christian Church. The Race Unity Group and First Christian wanted to sponsor this for a variety of reasons. Our Sacred Conversations on Racial Injustice group at church has just finished reading the book over a series of weeks and discussed it. And we had previously read something by Carol Pirtle and had her, and I thought, well, maybe Darrel Dexter would come up the road. So we're so tickled that you came, and so excited that the SIU Press published it. And I shared with him we had a member many years ago who wrote a short history of First Christian, and we had an occasion in this congregation. It was during a week-long revival. It was not in the church building. There was another building on this site built in 1901, but it was in a tent outside at the end of a revival that robed members of the Klan came forward and gave the pastor an envelope with money and invited men to join. And the note in the book says it was $12, and that a couple weeks later they went to a revival at Marion First Christian and gave $30. So I don't know. And you wish people would keep more elaborate minutes of things. The only comment in the book was that the pastor warned the congregation that that money came with strings attached. Something would be expected for it. Which is mild. At least it leans in one direction, but in any case. So, thank you so much for coming, and I'll turn the floor over to you. And I probably should get on the other side so that I can see somebody.
Okay, I want to thank Carolyn for the invitation to come and speak, and I want to thank First Christian Church for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak this evening. I was born in Ullen, Illinois, and other people here also were born in Ullen, Illinois. And I say in my book that the silent ghosts of the Ku Klux Klan were all around me, and I didn't know it. So the first slide that'll come up in a second shows a place that I used to go by every day on my bicycle. And I was known for riding my bicycle all over, all the time. And I would go by, on my bicycle, the school bus would go by this site every day. When my mom and dad would load all the kids in the car and we would go to church, we would drive by this site. And the farmhouse in the back, you can see it in the background. My dad, when he got out of the service, he retired from the Navy and he moved back to Ullen. And the first job that he had out of the service was working in the barn on that dairy farm, milking cows. And my dad never told me anything about the Ku Klux Klan having ever been in the area. My grandfather and my grandmother never told me anything about the Ku Klux Klan having once been in the area. And in doing research for this book, I found very few people willing to say that they had ever heard of the Klan in the area. And I thought that was kind of strange. I had read a book called Bloody Williamson. Some of you probably read that book as well. And I knew about the Klan up in Franklin, Williamson County, but I thought that was, up there, not Pulaski County. But in doing research on the Second Ku Klux Klan, it's called, in Ullen, what I discovered was that there was a first Ku Klux Klan. And that first Ku Klux Klan is probably the one we all studied in high school history class. That was the Klan that was organized. Probably, and historians debate who and when it was organized, but probably in December of 1865, not too long after the end of the Civil War, in a place called Pulaski, Tennessee. And it was put together by former members of the Confederate Army. And it was kind of intended to be almost a fraternity-like organizations. And those were very popular There was the Masons, there were later the Elks, the Moose Lodge, there were other fraternal organizations. There was one called the Independent Order of Oddfellows that was nationally. It was a pretty big organization. And the Klan was intended originally to be a fraternal organization where old Confederates could get together and buddy-buddy. And then it changed. And then it changed to really a terrorist organization. When we think and hear the word terrorist organization, probably what image comes to your mind isn't something from here in the United States. They called it the Invisible Empire of the South, or the Invisible Empire of the South. And they had one important goal, and that was to disfranchise black voters. They wanted to take the achievements that the radical Republicans had made during Reconstruction in the area of civil rights. They wanted to take that down and take away the right of black men to vote. And that was their goal. They called it redemption. They were going to redeem the South. They wanted to put white people back exclusively in power in the South. Here in Southern Illinois, there was a Ku Klux Klan. And on the next slide, it'll show you an artist rendition made in, I think, 1875 of a Southern Illinois Klansman on the far right. And then on the left is the Ku Klux Klan that was organized in Tennessee. And in looking at those different organizations, the first Ku Klux Klan in Southern Illinois and then the Klan in the South that we all studied and know about, there are similarities in the way they dressed. And they also discovered that they had the same secret handshakes and signals. So there was a connection between the first Ku Klux Klan in the South and the Klan in Southern Illinois. But the Klan in Southern Illinois, when I began doing research and looking at newspaper accounts of their activities, I discovered that they really were not the same organization. In that the Klan in Southern Illinois, and they were very active in Williamson and Franklin counties. They were very active in Jackson County, especially in the Murfreesboro area. But their activities, at least those that were reported in the press, were directed towards white people. And it was more, it seemed to me, more of a organization of bullies who wanted to get together and tell people how to live. Their anger and their terror wasn't directed necessarily towards the African American community. It was directed towards mostly white people. But there were similarities between the organizations. The Ku Klux Klan kind of disappeared after what they called redemption. That is, once white people were put back in power in the southern states in particular, it had achieved its goal, and they disbanded. As a matter of fact, the leader, the first grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, was Nathan Bedford Forrest, Confederate general. And he told the Klansmen, "We've done it, burn your robes and celebrate. We've restored white power back to the South." And so it's over. Then in the early 1900s, they began to revise history and revise the image of the Klan. And there's nothing wrong with revision history. History is the past is reinterpreted all the time. We revise what we think about the past all the time, but it needs to be based on facts. And this revisionist history, this presentation of the Ku Klux Klan, was not based on the facts of the organization. there was a man, he was a minister, and his name was Thomas F. Dixon. I believe he was a Methodist minister. And he wrote a series of books. He went to a play called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And he said he left there, discussed it because of the positive presentation that was being presented of African Americans and the negative presentation that was being presented of white Southerners. And he said he was going to write a book to, quote, set the record straight. That's what he said. So he wrote a series of books about the first Ku Klux Klan. They weren't history books, they were novels. They were romance novels, basically. And these romance novels became very popular, and they sold millions and millions of copies. And once the books came out, they began to present the books as plays. So in the next slide, it'll show the Cairo Opera House. I'd read about and heard about the Cairo Opera House. I was surprised when I saw a picture. I'd seen pictures of the outside. This was a picture of the inside of the Cairo Opera House. And then they were having a play, a matinee, April 21st, 1904. They were presenting this play called the Ku Klux Klan. And it was, quote, according to the advertisement, a drama of absorbing interest dealing with the invisible empire which in 1870 stamped out Negro rule in the South. A direct contradiction of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And the performance was actually 1906. I think I said 1904 earlier. People knew better. If they knew the Klan, if they were from the South and moved north, people knew better. And the next slide will show newspaper accounts or newspaper reports of protest against the showing of this play. And African American citizens in Cairo, from churches in Cairo, met. And they met with the mayor and said, we don't want this play in Cairo. It's just going to stir up race hatred. We don't want this play in Cairo. They had meetings in Mound City. They had meetings in other places and said, we don't want this to be performed. In Chicago, Jane Addams, famous from Hull House, said, we don't want this in Chicago. We don't want this shown in Chicago. It's not based on fact. It's not truthful, and we don't want it shown. And in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Montgomery, Alabama, Macon, Georgia, they banned the play. But in Cairo, Illinois, the mayor said, we don't have the power to say this play can't be shown. And the manager of the opera house said, just wait, come see the show. There's really nothing in it that would upset black people any more than there are things in Uncle Tom's Cabin that upset white people. And so they showed the play. An interesting thing, if you're a teacher and you want to have a discussion or a debate amongst your students, I remember when I first read that newspaper account of the protest, I said, all right, this is activism at the grassroots level, but it's also censorship.
Against hate speech.
Freedom of speech. Free speech. So you can see both sides of it. Things are very often not simple, and they're not the way we first see them. So the next slide shows The Birth of a Nation, which was a silent movie. And I saw this in college for the first time, and I've watched it since. It's a hard movie to watch. It's very racist. It portrays African Americans only in the negative light. And it was made by a man named D.W. Griffith. And he released this in 1915. And when this play was released, The Klansman, or Birth of a Nation, which was based on one of the novels, The Klansman, When this was released, someone said, we need to bring the Klan back. Why did we ever let the Klan go away? That's the rebirth of the Second Ku Klux Klan. That's the focus of my research in the book, Pulling Off the Sheets. And so in 1915, on top of Stone Mountain, outside of Atlanta, Georgia, a Methodist preacher built an altar at the top, laid a Bible, had made a big cross that they were going to light as a beacon to the world, and revived the Ku Klux Klan. So in 1915, the Ku Klux Klan was revived on top of Stone Mountain, Georgia. One of the big debates in the country today is over monuments like the one at Stone Mountain, Georgia, that celebrates the Confederacy. Lots of communities have opted to take those down, and it's brought a lot of strife in other communities that have looked at the issue of monuments that celebrate the Confederate States of America or Confederate officers or officials. But regardless, the first Ku Klux Klan was revived, and they have a whole list of things that they are opposed to. They're opposed to suffrage and equality for Americans of African descent. So if we have the next slide, we can look at these. There we go. They were opposed to Jews. It was a very anti-Semitic organization. They were opposed to Catholics. I was talking to someone before. We started this evening, and she was from a community, she said, where the Catholic Church had been burned. They were opposed especially to immigrants. And they were opposed to immigrants unless they came from the Nordic countries of Europe. In other words, Northern Europe. The British Isles, Germany, Scandinavia. They were opposed to labor unions. And this is a kind of at the part of the heart of the conflict in Williamson County and Franklin County amongst coal miners. Because of the immigrants, many immigrants in the coal miners were, or many of the coal miners were immigrants, I'm trying to say. And they also said labor unions were just one step away from communism. They opposed the teaching of evolution in public schools. They said it goes against the Bible, therefore it can't be true. They were opposed, of course, to socialist and communist. So that's what they were opposed to. What were they in favor of? They were in favor of white supremacy. They were in favor, and this was the heart of their recruitment, the so-called old-time Protestant Christianity. They were opposed to prohibition, especially bootleggers and criminal activity in the alcohol industry during prohibition.
Opposed to prohibition or in favor?
No, they were, in favor of prohibition. If I said it the other way, I was wrong. They were in favor of prohibition, and they supported traditional family values. Not very specific as to what those are or were, but that's what they claimed that they supported. One of the things that interested me or surprised me as we went through research on the Ku Klux Klan was that the Ku Klux Klan, I always envisioned it as a Southern phenomenon or Southern organization and as being rural. But the Ku Klux Klan in Illinois actually started in Chicago and moved south. So 1921, the next slide shows a rally in Chicago in 1921. 10,000 people met at that rally in Chicago. in 1921. It began moving south so that by 1923, they had an organizational meeting in Springfield, Illinois at the fairgrounds. And most of us have been to Springfield. If you've ever been to the state fair, I'm sure you probably passed by that building. When they had their initiation meeting in 1923, it lasted until 4 a.m. with rallies and speakers. And then East St. Louis boasted 8,000 members of the Ku Klux Klan by 1925. Later, by 1923, they were starting to organize in Williamson, Franklin County, branched out into Perry and Jackson County, and then eventually moved farther south into Pulaski and Alexander County. But the recruitment was from the north-south. The other thing that surprised me about the Klan history was that most members of the Klan, and they boasted 5 million dues-paying members, were from the North. 60% of dues-paying Klan members were from Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. That's where most of the Klan recruitment was. In Pulaski County and Alexander County, where I focused my research, the organizer, and they were called Kleagles. So the Klan organization, the national organization, would pick somebody and send them out to recruit, move them into a community or a county and say it's your job to organize. And where would a Klan go if they wanted to organize? Well, first thing they did was this. They looked at Masonic, Oddfellow, whatever fraternity was active and already had members. They would look at those organizations and say, can we look at your members, or could we speak to your group sometime? And then they would look at the Protestant churches. What Protestant churches was the most fertile ground for recruitment? The Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Christian Church, the Congregationalist Church, and the Church of Christ. Those were the 5 Protestant church organizations. When they first met in Grand Chain, I have some newspaper clippings on the next slide, but when they first had an organizational meeting in Grand Chain, the Kleagle, or the organizer, Forrest Moreland, was giving a talk in Grand Chain, and somebody asked him, they said, we have a question for you. Why do you wear those hoods and masks? Are you ashamed? What are you afraid of? And Moreland said, well, I'm glad you asked that question. He said, we do that so we can slip up on criminals, so that we can infiltrate criminal activity and get an inside look. And then we can work with law enforcement to bring law and order to your community. William Paul Anderson was the pastor of the First Christian Church in Cairo, and he spoke at that Klan organizational meeting or rally in Grand Chain, and he invited the Klan to his church in Cairo. And in October of 1923, they came through the doors, and he was preaching his sermon, and the text from his sermon was brotherly love. And they came up the center aisle of the church and stood in front of the pastor and said, we have something for you to show you what we think of what you're doing in the community. It's a small token, and it was an envelope with money. That was repeated over and over again in church after church. Thebes, Illinois, the next slide shows the Methodist Episcopal Church. This church is still, the building is still standing today. but this building is used as a Pentecostal church now. But it was a Methodist Episcopal, or now for the most part United Methodist Church. They were having a revival meeting in the church, and in this revival meeting, Klansmen walked up in their robe and here's money. Here's $100. $75 is for you. $25 is, well, we see your church building needs a paint job, and use that $25 to paint the church. I've often suspected, although I've never been able to verify any documentation, but I've always suspected that the preachers gave that money back to the Klan. I don't think they really kept it. I think it was for show. I think it was for show as a recruitment tool. However, people who were pastors who joined the Klan could join for free. So they got free membership in the Klan. At the next meeting, next slide shows the Congregational Church in Mounds, Illinois. And in this Congregational Church, they were having a revival meeting. And they had a national evangelist come in. And she was preaching. And she was from Florida, but she had come up and she was preaching in the Congregational Church. The congregation, all the people were standing and they were singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And the Klan, that was their signal. They marched in, marched down the center aisle, and presented the minister or the evangelist with money. And the pastor said, "Thank you for coming. Please come often." Go back to that one. This shows the Ullen United Methodist Church. And I spent lots of time in the Ullen United Methodist Church. And in summer of 1924, same thing happened. This was a morning service. Klan walked down, center aisle, gave the preacher money, and they repeated the same thing in the Baptist church in Ullen. So many people were enticed to join that they decided they were going to have a Klan rally. And the next slide shows the Klan rally site. And this is where I started with this photograph. So on June 10th, 1924, 1,000 people showed up. They built a 30-foot cross of wood that they had soaked in kerosene. They erected that, and then they had all the trucks and cars parked in a circle around the cross. And then they initiated new members into the Ku Klux Klan, for which those new members paid $21.50 for membership. And that included not just the membership dues, those were, I think, $5 a year afterwards, but for your $21.50, you got your whole robe and gown and your sashes to wear. And you had to buy them from the National Klan organization. You couldn't make your own. You know, in movies, they show people, cutting out hose and sheets and making their own Klan. That's not the way it was with the Second Ku Klux Klan. The newspaper said at that Klan meeting, back then the town you were from was on your license plate. And so the reporter said he walked around and he wrote down where those cars were from. And those cars were from Grand Chain, Karnak, Cypress, Pulaski, Thebes, Elko, Tams, Mounds, Weetog, Dongola, Cairo, and then, of course, Ullen. You can't see it. Well, in the picture, got my directions kind of turned around. But to the right of the picture, across another field about that size, is where the town of Ullen is. and Ullen was a segregated town. The Illinois Central Railroad went down the center of the tracks. On one side of the town was exclusively white citizens. The other side of the town is where the African American community lived. And it was easily visible. That 30-foot cross that they lit or burned was easily visible to people in the black community. So what were the results of Ku Klux Klan activity in southern Illinois, Pulaski, Alexander County? What did it do? How did it influence the people that lived there, the white people and the black people that lived there? In 1924, there was a black family that moved from Charleston, Missouri, to a community outside of Ullen called New Hope. And the Klan showed up on their door the day after they moved in, and they had a bundle of switches that were tied up. And a spokesman told the family, "You have 7 days to move, or we'll come back." The black family chose to leave in that instance. Just a couple weeks later, between Tams and Elko, and if I can get the slide up, the next one, please. That was a site on the photograph on the right. That was a site that I visited lots as a teenager. There was a house there at that time. It's since been destroyed or torn down, actually. It was an old house, but my aunt lived there. And this house was past what they called the dead zone. So there was a line, a dead zone, in which black people were not allowed to cross for residency. And a black family had moved from Tennessee and moved into that house. And the Klan showed up one night with kerosene and told the people, "You're going to have to leave, you're going to have to move, or we're going to burn you out." This time, the black family that lived there had guns. And they stepped outside with the guns, and that was unexpected to the Klan. That's not the way they thought it was supposed to go down. And they dropped their kerosene and they left, only to return a couple nights later, a couple of them riding a mule. And they had dynamite. And they lit that dynamite and they threw it at that house. And that house, it blew off the porch of the house, but they rebuilt it. That's what the Klan did when they moved into southern Illinois. So it wasn't just about showing up at church services and giving the preacher money. There was an agenda that they had. There was a Klan rally in Harrisburg, Illinois in 1924, and a black man who was in jail, who had been accused of robbing a store in Harrisburg, there was an attempted lynching in Harrisburg, Illinois in 1924 after a Klan rally. So it stirred people up. People were bombarded, the local press, the state press, the national press. Read newspapers from the 1920s. It portrays African Americans as the enemy, as the other. It never presents them as equals or as Americans, and there would never be a story in the press in which they didn't put in parentheses colored or Negro. So the identity of the person was always noted in the press. It wasn't for white people accused of crimes, but always for black people accused of crimes. The next slide shows Ida B. Wells. You probably know who Ida B. Wells is. Ida B. Wells came to Cairo, Illinois twice. She came first in 1909 after a black man was lynched in Cairo, Illinois, and she came to get signatures on a petition to get the sheriff, who was sheriff and had custody of that man at the time, removed as sheriff, and she was successful in that eventually at the state level. She came back in 1924, and she spoke at Sumner High School in Cairo, and the newspaper accounts that talk about her coming to Cairo, it says here, Ida B. Wells will give a presentation at Sumner High School, which was a black school in Cairo. Schools were segregated. Right above that newspaper account, right the column to the left of it and the column below it, Ku Klux Klan rallies, where they would be held, where they would be. Also, I have no idea what Ida B. Wells said when she came the second time, because the press did put that insert that she was going to be speaking the time. They didn't send a reporter to hear what she had to say. So it wasn't reported what the message was. But it was during the height of Klan activity and Klan recruitment in Alexander and Pulaski County. All right, one last incident that happened in July of 1924. There was an 18-year-old girl. Her name was Daisy Wilson, and her father had a store in Villa Ridge, Illinois, in Pulaski County. And two guys came up to work in the orchards, supposedly, and they came to the store after it was closed, and they yelled from the street, "Hey, Captain, will you open the store for us? We need some groceries." And he went and opened the store, and Daisy Wilson, his daughter, went with him, see if she could be of any help. And one of the guys pulled a gun, said, "Stick 'em up, give us all your money." He had been in the store earlier, he saw lots of cash, and he had told his friend, "We can make money easier than picking peaches. This guy's got a whole box full of money." Well, he did have a whole cigar box full of money, but he lived right across the yard from a store, and he took that money home with him. So what the robbers got was a little sack that had 26 pennies in it, 26 cents. And there was a fight, and of course the daughter came to her, the rescue or support of her father. All of them tumbled out the door. The two guys ran off across the orchard, and one of them turned around and shot. He had a pistol. He said, "I shot just to be shooting," and it hit the girl, Daisy Wilson, right above the eye, and she was instantly killed. The two suspects were identified only as two young black men. The Klan organized posses all over the county, Pulaski County, Alexander County. And no doubt there were people in the posses that were also not members of the Klan. The Klan recruiter, Forrest Moreland, found two black men in Mounds, Illinois. They fit the description. This is two young black men. I don't know who they are. And he arrested them as suspects. And he found them, on the next slide it shows where he found them. He found them at the Mounds, train yards. And they had come in on a freight train that night and said, "We don't know what you're talking about. We just got here. We came on the train, we hitched a ride. Yeah, it's illegal, but we didn't have any money for tickets. We hitched our free ride on the freight train, just got off. We don't know anything about Daisy Wilson or anybody being killed. And they were arrested as suspects and brought to Mounds and then Mound City, and word got out. The suspects, the murderers of Daisy Wilson are in custody. And so a lynch mob surrounded Pulaski County Jail. Forrest Moreland was pretty sure, he was the Klan organizer, but he was pretty sure that these two guys he had arrested were not probably going to turn out to be the two murderers. But the crowd was there. The lynch mob was there. It was too late. And he stepped out, and this is one of the ironies. He stepped out and said, "Men, listen, you know me, I'm Forrest Moreland. I organized the Klan in this county, and let's pray." And the men took their hats off, and he prayed. It says he prayed for 10 minutes. And he prayed, "Lord, forgive us for what we are about to do." That's the only line in the prayer that's recorded. And the men, when he said amen, kind of looked around, put their hats back on, and they meandered away. And they went back home. And there wasn't a lynch or lynching in Mounds. The lynch mob didn't completely go away, so they kind of had held vigil outside. Later evidence became very clear that these two men that were suspects were not the murderers of Daisy Wilson. But they were that close to lynching two innocent men who had indeed, just because someone else on the train stood up as a collaborating witness and said, "Yeah, these guys came up on the freight train with me all the way from Memphis." But they were that close to lynching and murdering two innocent people. The lynch mob leaders were arrested. They were jailed until they paid bail. But all of the men were released. So there has never been a conviction that I can find record of lynch mob members accused of lynching or attempted lynching who were convicted of that, except for a lynching that occurred in Thebes, Illinois, and the guy got 30 days in the county jail. So what happened to the Ku Klux Klan? These are the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan. And a lot of people suspect that's actually the county courthouse in Pulaski County where the lynch mob surrounded. But the next slide will show the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, the Second Ku Klux Klan. W.J. Simmons is the man on the left. He was the founder of the Klan. He was a Methodist minister, but he was kicked out of the Methodist church for drunkenness and, quote, inefficiency. What he did do while he was the leader of the Klan is he hired these two other individuals as the publicist of the Klan. And their names are Edward Young Clark, who was the second imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and Elizabeth Tyler, who was the publicity agent for the Klan. They're the ones that convinced the Klan they needed to expand their hate list. they said, you could get a lot more members if you would find somebody else to hate besides just black people. Look at all the immigrants in this country. That's an untapped source right there. If you would just organize people that hate immigrants, you might have something. Prohibition. If you could stand up for prohibition, you could get all kinds of people. Because the country's full of people that are frustrated with the Charlie Burgers and the Shelton gangs that are running bootleg operations and speakeasy taverns, and all this is supposed to be illegal, and we know it's still going on. If you could organize people against that, you could get all kinds of members. What we do know is that the organizers, for every $10 they collected in funds, they kept $8 of that for themselves. Not the national organization, the organizers, the people. The Kliegels, those that were sent into the counties to organize at the county level, they got to keep so much of the money for every member that they brought in. Clark and Tyler were found in a hotel room in Georgia together. They weren't married. They were found in the room together with a bottle of whiskey during Prohibition. And people said, I thought you were against all that. What hypocrites. You say you stand for this, but then you do this. Edward Young Clark was able to keep $8 of every $10. The next shows the leader. Actually, he was the Grand Dragon of the Second Klan. He was the head of the Klan in Indiana and in Illinois. And he was in charge of recruitment. He was, it's very well documented, a very heavy drinker. I don't know if he was alcoholic, but he was a heavy drinker and a so-called womanizer. And in 1925, he kidnapped and raped a 29-year-old woman, and he was sentenced to prison for that in Indiana. He was paroled in 1950. This came out in the 1920s. So people were beginning to wise up about the leadership of the Ku Klux Klan. And then the other guy, I've met several people in Southern Illinois that see him as somewhat of a hero. His name is S. Glenn Young, and he was the Klan leader in Williamson, Franklin County, Illinois. And he was recruited by the Klan to come here and fight for Prohibition, to shut down the stills, the bootlegging operations, the criminal activity. He was hired specifically to do that. His activities brought about what we call the Klan War in Williamson County. And 20 people were killed in the Klan War in Williamson County. His reputation became so tainted and so connected with violence that he was even too violent for the Klan, and the Klan kicked him out, and then he was killed in a shootout in Herrin, Illinois in 1925. And then lastly, this slide shows a Klan rally in, of all places, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. By 1925, at least in Alexander and Pulaski County, the Klan had disappeared from newspapers, at least the front page of newspapers. But the Klan was short-lived as an organization in Pulaski and Alexander, a little bit longer in Franklin and Williamson County and Jackson. But I've suspected, and this is what it was my encouragement or rationale for writing the book, was it was time to reveal this past, that it had been covered up for too long. Lots of times we cover up the things we don't want to remember. And that's what we've done with the history of the Ku Klux Klan. People don't want to be connected with the Ku Klux Klan openly. Most people don't want to be. But it's a part of our regional history. It's a part of our local history. It's painful to remember history. History's not always a celebration of all the good things that happen and the good things we've accomplished. But we need to remember our history, the good and the bad, because it's more dangerous if we forget. It's more dangerous. There's a first Ku Klux Klan, there's a second Ku Klux Klan, now there's a third Ku Klux Klan. And people need to stand up and say no. They need to realize that white supremacy is wrong and that it only brings bad things, not only to black people, but to white people too. That it's time we pull the sheets off the past and stare at our history, and then we can move together. I think you are going to lead us in questions, if there are questions.
Thank you so much. Anybody have questions? I'm sure. Walter.
This is a hypothetical. Darrel, you're an average white male with basically no political views yet. You're going to a Klan rally, first time. How do you use their feeling?
I should repeat it for people who are watching on YouTube. Walter has asked, if you're an average white man and you go to a Klan rally and you don't have set political beliefs, how do you feel leaving that rally? Did I get that right? Okay.
First, let me say I've never been to a Klan rally. So I don't know. I'm sure there are people that would leave feeling excited about, hey, we're celebrating whiteness. You know, this is all about white power. And so we're going to celebrate that. And then other people would say they were disgusted when they went. I guess it all depends on you would have to ask the question, why would you go to a Klan rally to begin with? So people that are going to begin with probably already have some preconceived notions in their mind. Yeah.
Christy?
I was just wondering, the last slide you showed, I believe they didn't have no hoods over their faces.
Right.
I wondered about that. Were they just so brazen that maybe people didn't know them because they're from out of town and they're in Washington?
Right. This was...
Christy's asking, in the last slide, the Klan's people didn't have hoods on and wondered why that was.
Right. So they didn't mind people seeing them because it wasn't, like you said, in their hometown. Their identity wouldn't be known. One of the sources that I used when I did my research in my book was Growing Up in Cache Bottoms, which was written by a black woman who had witnessed a cross burning in Pulaski, Illinois. And she said they were masked and covered, but she knew every one of them. It wasn't it didn't really hide their identity. Yeah. In this case, where they're marching in Washington, D.C., they probably were told not to cover their faces. It was probably better propaganda if they were, yeah. And there's some anonymity in great numbers. Yeah.
True. Fern?
Why would you burn a cross?
Yeah.
Why do they burn a cross, Fern is asking?
I've asked that question, why burn a cross? Of all things, if you're a Christian group or claiming to be a Christian group, their response, the Klan says they do not burn crosses, they light crosses. So they're not wanting to burn them, They're wanting to light the cross as a beacon to the world of Jesus Christ.
They need a science lesson.
What?
They need a science lesson. You can't light it without burning.
Yeah. Francis?
Two questions. One, I think you said that this Klan activity in Illinois started in the 20s, and
Right.
so was that in response to the Great Migration from the South going northward?
Francis is asking if the Klan resurgence in the Chicago area in the early 20s was a result of the great migration of African Americans coming from the South to Chicago.
I think it's a result of conflict that occurred at the end of World War I, where white soldiers came back and found in factories where they used to work, there were black workers. There was conflict there. There were immigrants and immigrant labor, and there was conflict there. And one of the things that the Ku Klux Klan, a bill that they sponsored and Calvin Coolidge signed it into law, was the bill that established the quota system for immigrations and immigrants, where very few immigrants would come from anywhere other than what they called Nordic countries or Northern Europe. But I think that competition for jobs, as well as just the idea of white supremacy, wanting to make sure that black people weren't getting ahead of them in any way. There were people that were afraid of that financially, socially, and I think that was the big push in Chicago.
Your other question?
Yeah, my second question is, you said that you don't think that the pastors kept the money, and I was wondering what is your...
Francis is asking why he thinks, or what led him to believe that pastors who were given money by the Klans
Right.
people, that was all a show and that they actually gave it back.
I can't document that they gave it back. That was just always been my suspicion. That they're already getting free membership in the Klan. And I think that it's all for a show. That's why they march down during the church service, down the center aisle. And I also don't think this was a surprise to these pastors. They didn't look up and say, oh my gosh, it's the Ku Klux Klan.
You don't think it was a surprise?
I don't think it was a surprise. I think it was all prearranged. When you hear us sing this hymn, Battle Hymn of the Republic or whatever, that's your sign to enter the church and march down. When they came to the Ulin Methodist Church, they marched down. There were only, I think, 8 or 10 of them. And they stood right in front of where the pastor was preaching or speaking. They did their spiel, gave their money, and then they turned around to the audience and said, is there anyone here that would like us to unmask? That is, reveal our identity. And no one asked them to. I think they knew who these people were too. Ulin is a small town. We claim, when I lived there as a kid, we claimed 550 people. I tried counting. I couldn't get up to 550 people. But, yeah.
Interesting.
I'm curious. I didn't find the third Klan to be that much different from the first. So, beyond the history, what determines that this group ended and this one, the new one began?
Right.
Juliet.
And whoever's in the county, where are we standing now?
Juliet is asking, she doesn't see much difference between the first, second, and third Klan. So what's to say that it ended and started?
Right. The first Klan had a political agenda, and that was keeping black men from voting. The second Klan was less political. It was more about getting money. They still were racist, white supremacists. But it was more about the money. They presented themselves as a family organization. They had picnics and barbecues. They wouldn't let women join, but they had women auxiliaries. They had, just like the Hitler Youth, they had the Klan Youth. It was more of a different type of organization. The third Klan, the present day Klan, is a violent terrorist organization, a white hate group. Second Klan said, we don't hate anybody. The Second Klan would say, we have the best interest of black people and the black community in mind. White supremacy, they said, is good for white people and black people. And some white people believe that.
Jim, did you have a hand up?
Well, yeah, I guess I have two questions related. My first was actually, you got part of that answer there. But you said that what you referred to as
The Second Klan.
Ended roughly at the end of the 1920s.
Yeah.
The third one is here now. Is the one you referred to as the third one the same organization that we kind of
Same name.
in the 50s and the 60s?
Yeah, the 50s and 60s. And people debate, I said the Klan kind of disappeared in the 20s around here, but it continued on as a national organization at least to 1940. But the tradition of the Klan was always there. From the first Klan, so 1870s, mid-1870s, we have the end of Reconstruction, so-called redemption of the South. That doesn't mean that people forgot how to night ride. They didn't forget how to put the sheet on. But the organization itself had achieved what it thought its goal was. But as a group of, local guys that thought, well, this black family or this black man is stepping out of line, we need to do something, they still had their sheets handy to do that. So it's kind of hard to say when these different clans, as a national organization, it was gone, I think, by 1940. But again, it revived, especially during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. I read an account of a Klan member from Carbondale who was active, and this was an interview that was done of him or with him in 1967. And he talked about a Klan organization in Carbondale. But the difference between the third Klan and the second Klan, the third Klan and the current Klan is much more secretive. Yeah.
Francis? Oh, okay. Jim?
You had in the where the two families that tried to move in, the second one, when they kind of stood the ground in the house
Right.
in Elko. As I understood it, they didn't get run out, even though they had two trips there when when they ran off the gun, and the second one, the guy showed up with the dynamite. But maybe I understood the story wrong, but in the beginning, your family wound up in that house.
Yes.
So, what happened to that family?
The
Jim
black
asked
families,
what happened to the black family that, the second story that, what happened to them after, your aunt lived in that house, so.
well, before she lived in it.
Yeah.
Right. So the newspaper accounts identify the name of some of those people that were living in that house. I can't trace what happened to them. I can say they're not on the 1930 census, and that there are no black families living, it would be north of what's called the dead zone. It was north of the gravel pit switch between Elko and Tams. So they didn't stay. I asked my aunt, and we celebrated her 98th birthday yesterday, and I asked her, I said, did you ever know the history of the house you lived in? And she rented the house. And the people that were involved in that mob, in that dynamiting incident, at least the people accused of that, they were charged. And so I have their names. And the man that my uncle rented the house from was a son of one of those men that was indicted for that activity. But I asked her, I said, did you ever hear anything or any mention about the Klan in the area? And she said, well, we didn't have those around here, did we? And I said, well, yeah, we did. And I said, did you know anything about the history of the house that you used to live in? And she said, well, not really. She said, I can tell you the man that they rented the house from, that man's mother was a very old woman in her 80s and 90s in the 1980s when my aunt lived there. And she said, well, she told me this story once. She said, my aunt said, you know, there right in front of the house, there's a mound where Easter flowers grow. And she said, Miss Raby told me that, well, there was a black family that was passing through, and we let them stay there for a while. And while they lived there, their baby died, and they buried their baby there in the front yard. But they were just passing through. They didn't stay very long. That was the most that she could tell.
I just had a question about Ida B. Wells's visits to Cairo,
Yeah.
because she's such a significant figure. I'm wondering if there are any markers showing where she spoke, and also if in your research you got to talk to any black families in Cairo that had in their living memory or had been passed down, going to see Ida B. Wells.
Francis is asking if there's any documentation, any marker. I know you said of Ida B. Wells' second visit to Cairo, or any oral history from black families.
Ida B. Wells wrote an autobiography, and in that autobiography, she tells the story of her visit to Cairo. And she tells the exact street address where she spent the night, because she was originally going to spend the night with a black pastor when she came in 1909. And the black pastor had kind of reprimanded her when he met her at the train station, said, you know, Sheriff Davis is a nice white man. Why do you want to come up down here and stir people up against, he's a nice white man? And Ida B. Wells got so angry she refused to stay. And she said, if you allow anybody to get away with lynching one black man, you open the gate for the lynching of any black man. And she refused to stay in his house, and she stayed in the house of another person. I have their street address, and I located where that place was. It's an empty lot today. There's no historical marker. Ida B. Wells slept here. And at Sumner High School, they have a history display there that mentions, I believe, Ida B. Wells coming to Cairo. As far as having anybody say that they had reminiscences or memories of hearing her speak, no. And she came in the 1920s, so by the time I started research about 4 or 5 years ago, people would have been pretty old to have actually been present to hear her speak.
Walter?
I'd like to add to your answer to Francis about the focus of the Klan in the 20s. After World War II, the immigration pattern from Europe changed. And we no longer had the Scandinavian and Northern, but you had the Mediterranean. They came in, their hair was darker, their complexion was darker, they were Catholic, and some even spoke Hebrew. So the pattern changed, and they were against immigration, and there was a Sacco and Vanzetti case, which the judge, I think, referred to them as Dago bastards or something to that effect. But it was interesting to see that that 1925 rally in D.C. was on August 8th, which was the main date for the celebration of emancipation.
They called those immigrants the new immigrants. And they weren't Protestants. They were more likely to be Catholic or Jewish. They were more likely to come from Russia, Italy. And that's why they said, the Klan said, we need this law put in place that says only a certain percentage. What they did was look, I think, the 1890 census and said, okay, how many people from Italy are in the 1890 census? Well, not very many in 1890. So they said, okay, 5% of that number, or whatever the percentage was. How many are from Germany? Oh, wow, we have a lot from Germany. Well, 5% of that number. That's the quota system. And that stayed in place for decades. Yeah.
Speaking of Germany, I wondered when you listed the flavors, the denominations, so why didn't they go to Lutheran churches? That would be Scandinavian and German.
Lutheran churches have a strong connection to Germany. As a matter of fact, in Union County where I live, the German tradition is strong, and as a matter of fact, they continued having services in the German language for a long time. And I think that connection to immigration and that memory of immigration may have been a reason. But you're right, there was not, at least in Union, Alexander, and even up here, Jackson, Williamson County, Lutherans were not a big part
Do you guys
of
know
that
anything
recruitment.
about that?
Well, being a Lutheran pastor
Mhm.
myself, Lutherans didn't give up their European languages until 20s, 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to learn English when I went to kindergarten, so yeah.
So there was that sense that, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Congregationalists, they already were speaking English.
Mhm.
And there was a resistance in Lutheran.
So it would have been hard for them just logistically to.
Yeah.
Brian is saying that the immigrant Lutheran churches in this area, mostly German, did not give up their language easily. I mean, I remember growing up, and there were still churches in the 70s and 80s in Northeast Ohio that had services, and so it would have been harder for Klans people, whereas the Methodists and the Baptists, they were several generations removed and were speaking English.
My great-grandmother's family, she spoke, they called it Dutch, but it was German. But her ancestors came here in 1732. They kept the German language, and that's what they spoke at home.
Interesting.
And the
So
church
the stubbornness
service,
pays off
the church services remained in German till at least the late 1800s. And some I know continued after that.
I remember in seminary being told that there was concern whether or not the proper proclamation of the gospel could happen in a language other than German. Because it was that strong. And they didn't have they didn't have people to translate the liturgy and the Bible. So they held on to that language a long time.
Yeah.
Well, people were executed for translating the Bible into English from Latin. And Islam, there are still people that think the Quran could only be studied and read in Arabic. So I don't know that connection between language and religion is strong universally.
Language.
Yeah.
Christy?
This is probably silly, but I'm curious. Where did they get their Ku Klux Klan name?
Christy asked just where the name came from, KKK. I'm very grateful that my middle initial is not.
Yeah.
Supposedly in Greek, maybe you studied Greek in seminary, you can confirm or reject this, but kikklos is a Greek word that means circle, and it's supposed to be a universal brotherhood of white men. And then they thought it would be neat if everything started with a K. So everything, Ku Klux Klan, the Kleagle, the Cloran was like the book of ceremony, and I can't remember all the other things that started with a K.
Interesting, I taught a wonderful little boy, and he was black, and his initials were KKK.
Did you have your hand up, Ella?
Yes. I'm curious about the emergence of that one woman named Tyler.
Daisy Wilson?
No, Tyler, the marketing person who had the
Oh.
affair and was drinking with.
Yeah. For most of what I hear, it was brotherhood, men.
Yeah.
And that woman would have pretty prominent positions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Lacey's asking about Ms. Tyler, who was the marketing person, and how is it that a woman was part of this fraternal organization in a prominent position?
I didn't want to give her a hand on this, but I did.
Okay.
I would say women can be just as greedy as men, and I think it was just about the money.
Oh, I can
Yeah,
imagine her.
but you're right. They wouldn't let her join. Yeah.
Walter?
Yes, I know that, you know, they have, and it's not through the acronym ANA, ain't no N-word allowed. And I know they're trying to change that image. A lot of people have moved in and don't know about it. But there's a coming south, after you cross 46 on 51, there's a barn. And whoever owns that, or whoever has access to it, when Obama was in around that time, they had an effigy of black devil.
Really?
During COVID, when they were talking about first responders, there was a bunch of figurines or things, but they had the white ones who were the first responders, then they had the black ones in chains being carried. I even took a picture of that.
Wow.
So you may have some change in attitude,
Yeah.
but you still have that base to deal with. And the last thing I'd say is Indiana has taken
Oh, yeah.
over as far as the leading state for the Klan. I think at one point the Grand Wizard was governor.
Yeah.
And that's where we get John Roberts and Eddie Tony and a lot of folks.
Indiana had more members of the Second Ku Klux Klan than any other state. They were very actively recruiting. And attitudes changed, I don't know why, but it seems like they're changing slowly, but they're still there. Yeah.
You're helping.
Well, there was a sign off of what's called St. John's Road coming onto Highway 127. And if you turn left, you go towards Tams and Carroll. If you turn right, you go towards Anna and Jonesboro. And the state sign was there showing, you know, left here, right to this town. And someone, we want to say kids, had put going left to Tams and Caro, had painted black, and then going white to Anna and Jonesboro had painted white. So the attitudes are still there. But yeah, I do think they slowly change.
Al?
The difference between the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy.
Difference between Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy.
There is a difference because the Ku Klux Klan is an organization, and I'm pretty certain none of my family, grandparents, parents, great-grandparents were members of the Ku Klux Klan because it costs $21.50 to join. They didn't have $21.50 to spend on that. Were they white supremacists? I believe they were. So there is a difference. You can be a white supremacist and not be a member of the Klan. You can't be a member of the Klan and not be a white supremacist if you really believe in what the Klan speaks out for.
I've got some questions that came from our reading group. We wondered if Mr. Moreland, if the recent college that emerged in Franklin County, Moreland College, is that the same family, do you know?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know about the college and the history of the college or the origin of the name. I don't know about that. But I do know that the Moreland came from Indiana, and came and was sent to Grand Chain to recruit from the Klan.
Okay.
When the Klan began to disband in Pulaski County, he moved to Florida. And so did the pastor of the First Christian Church at Cairo. He moved out and pastored a church in Florida as well. The Moreland, though, that was the Kleagle, came back to Metropolis, and he died in Metropolis, I think in the 1970s. And I had I took the opportunity to contact his grandson, who was in the service, and probably shouldn't have said what I said in the initial letter, which was, I'm researching the Ku Klux Klan, and I think your grandfather was an organizer. Do you have
Wouldn't you love to have coffee?
do you have any information you could share? And
Crickets?
he never responded.
Yeah.
And what he had posted about his family, which had given me the contact information at Ancestry.com, all of that was taken down. So I got the suspicion he was embarrassed about it and didn't know. But I firmly believe that you're only responsible for yourself. So even if my father and grandfather had been a member of the Ku Klux Klan, that's on them. That would have nothing to do with me. So we're only responsible for ourselves and our own actions.
Tell us about your co-author, Mr. Beatles. We wondered, who's John Beatles?
John Beatles. John Beatles, he grew up in, his family was from Cairo, Illinois. And he taught in St. Louis, and then he taught at a couple other places and went on to get a PhD and taught at a university. He lives outside of Atlanta, Georgia. He's 86, I think, years old now. And he wanted to write, he was doing research on the lynching of Froggy James. And he wanted to know if I had any information for him. And he came to Cairo, and we met at Morris Library here in Carbondale and shared information, and he presented his book to SIU Press, which they rejected. And he basically kind of said, here, this is what I did. Rewrite it, change it, do whatever you think you have to do. This is what SIU says needs to be done for them to even consider it. So and he paid me, but I spent a lot of time preparing his manuscript for publication, and it was printed. It's called Stained with Blood and Tears, and it's about Cairo, Illinois in the early 1900s. And then after we had worked so closely on that project, he didn't want to give it up. He said, let's do something we found this information about the Ku Klux Klan and the lynching attempts in Pulaski County. Nobody is writing about that. And so I wrote about that. He shared his research, and then SIU published that.
Oh, great.
So we are very pleased with the opportunity.
Collaboration. Yeah.
Otherwise, all that research would be on my computer, and none of you likely would know about it, except maybe you and you. But.
So he did, I don't want to put you in the position of doing this, but he did bring copies of the recently published book. So if you want to purchase one, I imagine you can, right?
They can. Yes, they can.
Okay.
At a discount.
Why, I don't know who this person is that you collaborated with, but why wouldn't they publish his book? It had to do with him?
It had nothing to do with him personally. It had to do with the shape that it was in. It just wasn't in the right format. He had written the book as one, no chapter breaks. He just wrote. He just sat down and wrote. And yeah, and SIU will provide editorial assistance, but they're not going to write your book for you. So I think that was it. It wasn't anything personal.
Is he a white guy or a black guy?
He's white, I believe. Yeah, he looks white. I think he identifies as white.
Is there a young street in Maryland, or is that just young?
DeYoung, yeah.
Okay, is that named after the gentleman in the young in the film, in your presentation?
Is DeYoung Street named after, was there a DeYoung in the presentation?
What's it?
C.O. DeYoung?
It's not D, it's just young.
It's just young, okay.
Okay. Marlon, you had a question?
Was the Klan involved at all in the race riots in Cairo in the 70s, 60s?
The Second Ku Klux Klan had disappeared, and that's where it gets kind of tricky. So there was an organization in Cairo in the city that called, white organization that called themselves the White Caps. It basically was the same, but they didn't wear the pointed hats and robes. They wore white construction hats. And they were I say, in my opinion, a vigilante group that wandered the streets of Cairo at night.
Marlon's question was, did the Klan have anything to do with the race riots in Cairo in the 70s? Yeah. And you're saying it was a group called the White Caps?
White Caps.
And
that was a part of it.
Yeah.
Were the White Caps.
Emphasis on a different syllable, yeah. One of the members of our group who's watching remotely wondered, we know you recently retired as a high school teacher and wondering how much this research entered into your teaching in class.
Actually, the research for this started while I was teaching.
Okay.
And I had a Illinois history class. It was an election. They didn't have to take it. It was optional. So I got students that usually were interested in history, and we always would have local history projects. And so I shared some of my research that I'd found in newspaper accounts at SIU, brought the students up here. They looked at the microfilm. They did a presentation at the end of school. And this is probably 10 years ago, maybe. Yeah, it's before I started writing the book. And they did a presentation to the community.
Oh,
and
neat.
People came in. And it was with varied enthusiasm. The reactions were, why do you want to talk about this? This was a long time ago. Why do you want to talk about this now? We're just starting to get over it. It makes us look bad. We used to be like that maybe. We're not like that anymore. That's the reaction I got.
That the students got.
And disbelief. That's not real. That didn't happen. No. Wow. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah, because there is a difference talking about this in Carbondale than in...
And when my students gave the presentation, I want to commend, he's since passed away. He was a real estate agent in Alexander Pulaski County when people were saying, oh, I don't think this is as big of a deal, you're exaggerating. He stood up and said, you all know who I am. And when I was selling houses, I was told off the record in Thebes, Illinois, don't try to sell a house to a black family. And he was willing to admit that or say that. Of course, he was retired, so it wasn't going to hurt his business, I guess.
Wow. Marlon?
How aware are people of the dead zone? You described it, right? Or
Yeah.
am I using the right term?
Marlon
Dead
asked
zone.
how aware people are of the dead zone in
That
Olin.
line that you're talking about? Does
So-
the common person know that, or who knows it?
If you didn't know, they would tell you. Yeah. So I don't know when the black families moved up. This is an interesting part I didn't have in the presentation. But when those black families moved up and lived in that house, they were brought to plant cotton. And cotton was making a resurgence. And a lot of people didn't know how to plant and grow cotton. So they said, well, I think I know somebody that does. And they recruited. They went south and recruited black families to come and live. I don't know if when that black family, or families, actually it was a group, whether they were told, you know, there might be trouble. They did have guns and they were ready, but the dead zone is what they called north of the gravel pit switch. So there was a switch off of the main railroad line that went out to a gravel pit. South of that switch, Tams, Illinois, Ullin, Illinois, on farther south, that was acceptable for black residency. North of that line where that house was, where my aunt lived, was not. And they called it the dead zone. And a guy named James Lowen wrote a book that became very popular a few years ago called Sundown Towns. And he doesn't talk about this incident, but he talks about other incidents in Anna, Illinois, in his book.
Well, our group sure enjoyed reading your book. We really loved it. And I'm looking at some of the people who are here. Al?
I was going to ask you, what's the membership dues in the Ku Klux Klan now?
Al wonders what the membership dues are in the Klan now.
I don't know what the dues are, but I can say I had a high school student that told me he was a member of the Klan years ago and showed me his membership card. So I think, and I also think it's probably not as much because they don't have the
infrastructure,
the gowns and the hoods, and it's secretive, and the recruitment and activity is done on the internet. Yeah.
Okay. Marlon?
What's that, and I'm blanking on his name, but Southern Poverty Law Center,
Yeah.
largely responsible for doing away with the national.
Right, it had to do with one background.
Mike McDonald in Mobile,
Yeah.
He sued them.
He was mentioned in Mobile, Alabama, and that trial was supposedly bankrupt.
Financially, yeah.
Marlon is saying that the Southern Poverty Law Center, in suing the Klan for one of the lynchings, probably bankrupted them, Walter is adding, and that may have contributed to their lower key.
Don't
count them out?
Yeah, they're still there. They may be gone as an organization up front. I'm sorry, that's my phone.
That's okay.
But they're still there. Yeah.
My question was related to his. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say the influence of the Klan would be today?
I wouldn't think it would be much of an influence. I'm going to give up.
Scale of 1 to 10, what would be the influence of the Klan today, Walter's asking?
Yeah, I don't think the Klan, because people don't want to identify with the Klan in general.
And there are plenty of other white supremacist organizations. So.
And growing up, I, as a white kid, was taught white supremacy, but you don't tell anybody you're a white supremacist.
Well, that's
you know what I'm saying?
Endemic, yeah.
Yeah. So definitely don't join the Klan, but yeah, you know. But yeah, you're better than black people. But yeah, and I think that's a general attitude that a lot of people from my generation have.
Yeah.
Not universal, but.
Yeah. Dr. Lacey?
A very subjective question, I guess it is, asking you to make a comment. I've lived in Southern Illinois since 1960, having been born in southeast Missouri. So I've been in this general geographic area. My own impression is, in reference to the dead zones, the towns in Southern Illinois all have dead zones.
Yeah.
Or continue to have dead zones.
Right.
Almost dead zones. Or they are all white.
I agree. So growing up, like I said, in Ullin, Illinois, there were white citizens and there were black citizens. It was segregated in housing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's true in Cairo, Illinois.
Yeah, Carbondale is, yeah.
So even, so Some towns said no black people at all are allowed, but those in which black people lived, I agree, they're segregated. Good point.
Yeah, Dr. Lacey was saying it's not just in Olin, but in her experience of some years, 60 years, that every town in Southern Illinois is either all white or it has a dead zone. It has segregation or had, yeah.
Some of them have.
Yeah, there's been some, yeah.
Working on it.
Yeah.
Not complete.
Well, there's some wonderful people for you here to meet. I'd like to sort of put an end to this pattern, and allow you to meet some people. And I imagine some of you all have questions, and certainly don't want to hold anyone hostage. So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for your presentation. And oh, we need to make a fuss and slobber all over Alan, Dia, and Roger for doing the technical part and putting us on YouTube. So thank you so much.
Hey.
I don't want to slobber over